The question on the board. The old wooden door creaked open softly as Keanu Reeves stepped into the grand lecture hall of Harvard University. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards. And he definitely wasn't acting like a world-famous movie star. Instead, he wore a plain black hoodie, faded jeans, and a gentle smile. The students inside the room turned slowly, puzzled by the sight of him. Whispers filled the air. "Is that Keanu Reeves? What's he doing here?" But Keanu didn't respond to the whispers. He quietly made his way to the back of the room and sat down in an empty chair. No cameras, no announcements. Just him. It was a chilly October morning, and the Harvard campus was alive with orange leaves and the energy of young minds. Professor Hartwell, a stern mathematician in his early 60s, stood at the front. He was a traditionalist. Sharp suits, strict lectures, and a belief that real knowledge came only from hard work and discipline. As he turned toward the board, he said in a dry voice, "Today, we will explore an unsolved problem in pure mathematics. It's a riddle that many great minds have attempted and failed." He began writing a long equation on the board, symbols stretching across in loops and layers, growing denser with each line. The students watched, wide-eyed, already feeling the weight of the problem. Professor Hartwell then turned and noticed Keanu sitting quietly among the students. He frowned. "You there?" he said, pointing with the chalk still in his hand. "Yes, you, the one in the back. Would you care to tell the class why you're here?" Keanu looked up, unfazed. "Just sitting in, learning something new." "Learning something new?" the professor said, clearly annoyed. "We're not discussing movie scripts here. This is advanced mathematics." Keanu didn't reply. He simply nodded respectfully. The professor wasn't done. "Very well," he said with a cold smile. "Why don't you come up here and solve the first part of this problem for us?" The entire room froze. A few students chuckled under their breath. One whispered, "This is going to be awkward." Keanu stood up slowly, walked toward the board, and took the chalk from the professor's hand. He stared at the equation for a moment. His eyes scanned each symbol, each number, as if reading a language the others couldn't quite grasp. The silence in the room deepened. After a few seconds, Keanu made his first mark. He didn't hesitate. His movements were calm and confident. The chalk glided across the board, line by line, building a solution that was both simple and elegant. Students leaned forward, eyes wide. Professor Hartwell's smile faded. Within 4 minutes, Keanu stepped back and placed the chalk gently on the tray. Then he turned to the professor. "I believe this leads to the golden symmetry theorem," he said softly. "From there, you just factor it using modular identities." The room exploded with gasps. The professor stared at the board. He took a step forward, blinking. Then another. And finally, he lifted his glasses and examined the solution closely. It was correct. Not just correct, but refined. Flawless. Professor Hartwell looked stunned. The students were whispering again, but now their voices were filled with wonder. He solved it in 4 minutes. How does an actor know this stuff? Was that even human? The professor cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, where did you learn this?" Keanu smiled. "Before acting, I used to study math. It was my first love. I never gave it up. I just stopped talking about it." A deep hush settled in the room. It was the kind of silence that follows truth, undeniable and unexpected. After a moment, a girl in the front row raised her hand. "Can you stay and teach us more?" A few others nodded. Keanu looked around, his face thoughtful. Then he said, something that made every heart pause. "I didn't come here to teach. I came here because I'm still learning. Every day. From everyone." Professor Hartwell, for the first time in years, looked like he didn't know what to say. After class, a young student named Elijah followed Keanu outside. He was shy and wore thick glasses. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. Keanu turned to him. "I believed I could, and I practiced. Over and over. Not because I had to, but because I loved it." Elijah looked down at the notebook in his hands. He had been struggling with math for months, but something in Keanu's words made his heart lift. "Thank you," he whispered. Keanu smiled. "Don't give up. The mind is like a muscle. The more you use it with kindness, the stronger it gets." As Keanu walked away, blending once again into the crowd, no one saw a celebrity anymore. They saw something else. They saw a man who didn't need to prove anything. They saw a student of life, and they would never forget it. Whispers beyond the classroom. The air around Harvard was different that afternoon, not because of the weather, but because of what had happened that morning. Word had spread fast. The story was moving from dorm to dorm, whispered in corridors and messaged across student group chats. Keanu Reeves solved Hartwell's equation. No, like really solved it. And Hartwell didn't say a word. In the student cafe, groups gathered around phones replaying someone's secret recording of the moment. Though blurry and shaky, the video clearly showed Keanu at the board, drawing elegant lines of logic and reason with calm confidence. And that small moment, caught from the back row, was already going viral. Meanwhile, Professor Hartwell sat in his office, the door shut tightly. He hadn't spoken to anyone since class ended. In front of him sat a copy of the same equation, now with Keanu's full solution, copied word for word. The professor's eyes traced it again and again, but the more he read, the more distant he felt. He wasn't angry. He was confused. How could an actor, a man from Hollywood, grasp the depths of a problem that had left seasoned mathematicians scratching their heads for years? He pulled out his old university file and flipped through names, scholars, visiting fellows, notable thinkers, and paused at a name near the bottom. KeanuReeves, he whispered. His fingers trembled slightly as he dug into the file. Yes, it was him, Keanu Reeves, a former math student from the University of Toronto, enrolled briefly in a joint philosophy and mathematics program in his early 20s, then just vanished from the academic world. He left before he published, Hartwell muttered. Meanwhile, outside on campus, Keanu walked alone through a quiet garden between lecture buildings. His steps were slow, thoughtful. Not because he was sad, but because the place reminded him of a time he hadn't visited in decades, a time when he used to sit under trees just like this one, scribbling ideas in a notebook. He found a bench under a maple tree and sat down. A girl named Maya, one of the students from that morning, hesitated a few feet away. She had been following him quietly, trying to build the courage to speak. Keanu looked up. "You can sit," he said with a gentle smile. Maya sat down, nervous. "Sorry to bother you." "You're not," Keanu replied. She glanced at the ground. "I'm not very good at math. Actually, I hate it. But the way you solved that problem, it didn't look scary anymore. It looked beautiful." Keanu nodded. "Math is just a language, like music. If someone teaches it with fear, it becomes a cage. If they teach it with curiosity, it becomes a door." Maya's eyes widened. "Did someone teach it to you that way?" Keanu leaned back, looking up at the leaves swaying above. "My sister used to. She was better than me. She said numbers were like people, each with their own story. She died, young, but her love for learning stayed with me." Maya didn't know what to say. There was a silence between them, soft and respectful. Keanu looked at her. "You don't have to love math, but don't let fear choose what you avoid." "I want to learn," Maya said finally. "Even if I'm slow." Keanu smiled. "Then you're already faster than most. Most people never even try." Later that day, in a quiet hallway near the math department, Professor Hartwell ran into the university dean. "Did you see the footage?" the dean asked. "Yes," Hartwell said, shortly. "Well, the board's impressed. They want to invite him back for a public session. Maybe even let him speak." Professor Hartwell's expression turned stiff. "He's not a scholar." "He might be more than that," the dean said, holding out a thin folder. "You should read this. He's been funding rural education programs, setting up anonymous scholarships. He even gave a full donation to rebuild a destroyed school in India, all without using his name. Hartwell took the folder surprised. Why would someone do that, and not tell anyone? The dean smiled. Maybe he doesn't want to be famous. Maybe he just wants to help. That night, Keanu stayed in a modest hotel room near the campus. No suite, no attention. Just a quiet place with a window that opened to the city lights. He opened his worn notebook and began writing again. Pages, filled with symbols, thoughts, and questions. He paused on one line and underlined it. What you understand, share. What you don't, seek. What you fear, face. He closed the book gently. In another part of the city, Elijah was sitting on his dorm bed, still thinking about what Keanu had said earlier. He opened his own math textbook and stared at the problem he'd been avoiding for weeks. This time he didn't skip it. He began writing. Keanu didn't know it yet, but the simple act of solving an equation had done more than impress a room full of students. It had cracked open a belief buried deep inside them, that some problems were too big, too hard, too far from their reach. He had reminded them that brilliance didn't have to be loud, and that sometimes humility was the strongest proof of genius. The math club challenged the next morning. The sun peeked through the ivy-covered walls of Harvard, casting soft golden light on the pathways. Students rushed across campus, coffee in hand, backpacks bouncing as they moved between lectures. But today the energy felt different, more alive, more curious. A poster had appeared on the main notice board outside the math department. Open challenge session, tonight at 6 p.m., Math Club Hall, hosted by Professor Hartwell. Special guest Keanu Reeves. Students stopped to stare. Wait, he's actually coming? Are we allowed to ask him questions? What if he solves another impossible problem? Across campus, Keanu Reeves was sitting in the quiet corner of the university library. Not many noticed him there, head down reading an old book on ancient number systems. Next to him sat Maya and Elijah, both with notebooks in hand. Maya was stuck on a problem again. Why can't I figure this one out? She muttered, scribbling and then scratching out her own answer. Keanu looked over and smiled. Because you're thinking like someone trying to be perfect. Maya looked up. Isn't that a good thing? No, Keanu said gently. It's better to think like someone who's trying to understand. Perfection comes later. Elijah nodded. That's what you did with the board equation, right? You just understood it. Keanu smiled again. I tried to understand the heart of the problem, not just the numbers. They all went quiet for a moment, until Maya suddenly asked, Are you really going to the challenge tonight? I think so, Keanu said. They invited me, and I like the energy here. Maya looked worried. But Professor Hartwell? He didn't seem too happy the last time. Keanu paused. People are allowed to feel things. Sometimes when they feel challenged, they put up walls. But if we keep showing respect, those walls might come down. That evening, the math club hall was packed beyond capacity. Students sat on the floor, stood in the back, and even leaned through the open doors. The old chalkboard had been cleaned thoroughly, and a row of chairs was arranged up front, one of which had a small handwritten sign, Guest, Keanu Reeves. Buzz of excitement quieted as Professor Hartwell stepped in, holding a thick folder of problems. He looked at the crowd, cleared his throat, and said in a dry tone, Tonight is about logic, not movies, not fame. We are here to think. He turned toward the door as Keanu walked in, calm and composed. He wore the same hoodie and jeans from before, and nodded politely at the professor. A few claps rose from the students. Hartwell gestured toward the board. Mr. Reeves, care to solve one of our selections? Keanu walked up, eyes scanning the room. Then he looked at the problem already written on the board. It was layered, deep, and confusing. The kind of problem designed to trap the mind in circular thinking. Keanu studied it silently. Hartwell crossed his arms. The room went quiet. After 2 minutes, Keanu picked up the chalk. Instead of solving it all at once, he broke it into parts. He circled the base pattern, then underlined the recursive element. Finally, He drew a line under the board and wrote a short phrase. Simplify the question first, then simplify the answer. Students leaned in. One by one, he walked through the steps, each more intuitive than the last. By the time he reached the final equation, it all looked obvious, like a puzzle finally clicking into place. The room erupted in soft applause. Hartwell didn't clap, but he didn't interrupt either. Keanu turned to the crowd. Anyone want to try the next one? A girl near the front raised her hand. Can we try it together? Keanu nodded. Yes, that's the best way. And for the next hour, that's what they did. Not a lecture, not a show, but a conversation. Students came up, made mistakes, laughed, corrected each other, and learned. Maya even stood up once, nervous, but Keanu nodded gently at her. She solved the pattern. Everyone clapped. At the back, Professor Hartwell was still watching, arms crossed, eyes unreadable, but something in his face had changed. Less cold, more thoughtful. After the session ended, most of the students left buzzing with excitement, but Hartwell stayed behind. He walked up to Keanu. Why didn't you finish your studies back then? He asked. Keanu looked at him. I didn't leave math. I just chose a different path. But math never left me. Hartwell stared at him for a long time. Then he said quietly, You made me think today. Maybe I've forgotten how to be curious. Keanu nodded. It happens to all of us, even me. For the first time since their strange meeting, Professor Hartwell extended his hand. Keanu shook it. You're welcome back any time, Hartwell said. Outside the building, students stood in small circles, still chatting excitedly. Elijah looked up at the stars and said, I never thought I'd be excited about math again. Maya smiled. He makes it feel human. Far from the cameras, far from the lights of Hollywood, Keanu Reeves had done something unusual. He had brought heart into a world of equations, not through pressure, but through presence. The invitation Keanu never expected. The next morning, Harvard's official website posted a surprise article. Keanu Reeves joins live math challenge, inspires. Campus with humility and brilliance attached were photos. One of him smiling beside students, one of Maya solving a pattern on the board, and another showing Professor Hartwell watching Keanu closely, arms uncrossed, face calm. By noon, the article was everywhere, not on gossip sites, but in academic journals, education blogs. Even the MIT newsletter had shared it with a headline, When Hollywood Met Higher Learning, Keanu Reeves and the Power of Curiosity. The university's board was more than impressed. That afternoon, they held an emergency meeting. We need to do something formal, the dean said. This isn't just a one-time event, it's a movement. Invite him to speak at the annual symposium, a board member suggested. Make him a guest of honor. Another one added, no, more than that. Offer him a temporary fellowship. Let him lead a public workshop, something people from outside Harvard can attend to. And so it happened. By sunset, Keanu Reeves received an envelope slipped under his hotel room door. Inside was an elegant letter, written with care and sealed with Harvard's emblem. He read it slowly, sitting at the small desk by the window. We invite you, Keanu Reeves, to be the honorary fellow and keynote speaker at our annual symposium. Your unique contribution to education, humility, and human connection has brought something rare and powerful to our community. He blinked slowly, hands resting on the page. He hadn't come for this. He hadn't even planned to stay long. But something inside him stirred. A quiet voice. The same one that had whispered to him years ago when he first opened a book on geometry. He looked out the window. Could he say yes? Would it matter? That evening, while walking through the courtyard, he met Elijah and Maya again. They were sitting on the old stone bench beneath the tree where they'd first talked. Maya held up her phone. Did you see the news? They want you to speak, Elijah said excitedly. Keanu gave a soft laugh. I did. I'm still thinking. Maya frowned. Why wouldn't you? Keanu sat beside them. Because I'm not a professor. I don't have the degrees. I don't have the right voice for all this. Elijah shook his head. That's exactly why you should say yes. Maya added, when you talk, people listen. Not because you're famous, but because you see them. Most people teach math like it's a weapon. You teach it like it's a bridge. Keanu was quiet. He remembered something, years ago, on a movie set. Between takes, he had opened a book and started solving a problem for fun. Someone nearby laughed and said, actors don't do math. He never said anything back, but he remembered. Now, sitting under the fading orange sky, he looked at Maya and Elijah and said quietly, then I'll speak, but not for a title, not for a stage. I'll speak for those who were told they weren't smart enough. The word spread fast. The next few days became a blur. Students lined up for workshops where Keanu walked them through the basics of logic, pattern recognition, and curiosity. He never used complicated language, never tried to impress. Instead, he said things like, this equation is like a relationship. Don't force it to make sense. Listen to what it's telling you. Or if you fail 3 times, you're learning 3 times faster. The lecture halls filled up, then spilled out, then overflowed. Professors started attending, even those from outside Harvard. One night, a quiet woman with silver hair approached him after a session. She introduced herself as Dr. Lang from Princeton. I haven't seen students this alive in years, she said. How did you do it? Keanu looked down. I just treated them like human beings, not equations. One morning, Professor Hartwell entered the main lecture hall while Keanu was drawing a diagram on the board. The students fell quiet. Keanu turned, surprised. Hartwell stood there for a long moment, then said, May I teach this one with you? Keanu stepped aside. Of course, they taught together for over an hour. And in that hour, something rare happened. Hartwell laughed once. Keanu made a mistake and corrected it with grace. And the students watched 2 completely different men meet in the middle of something beautiful. Afterward, Hartwell walked up to Keanu and handed him a small notebook. I found this in the university archive. It's your old math journal. We kept it. Keanu opened it slowly, his handwriting, his ideas, his questions. They were all still there. He smiled. I thought I lost this forever. Hartwell nodded. You never really left us. You just took the long way home. That night, Keanu sat in his hotel room again, alone with the notebook in his hands. On the last page, there was a note he had written long ago. I don't want to be the smartest in the room. I want to be the most curious. He smiled softly, eyes full of memories. Keanu Reeves had walked into a classroom by accident. Now he was leading a generation by intention. One question changes everything. It was a Friday morning when the letter came. A quiet knock on Keanu's hotel room door, followed by a student delivering a cream-colored envelope with gold edges. The front had no sender name, just a stamp from the Department of Theoretical Mathematics. MIT. Keanu sat by the window, opening it slowly. Inside was a formal invitation. We respectfully invite Keanu Reeves to participate in the annual World Symposium of Logic and Reasoning held this year in Geneva. Your presence is requested for a special session titled Unexpected Minds, Brilliance Beyond Degrees. He stared at the letter for a long time. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially not for math. Film festivals, yes. Hollywood events, yes. But this was different. This was something deeper, something that touched the version of himself he'd left behind years ago. The young man solving problems at midnight, scribbling formulas in the margins of screenplays. Keanu placed the letter on the desk and leaned back. Then he picked up his phone. He called Professor Hartwell. You've heard of this Geneva event? Keanu asked. Of course, Hartwell said. Only the best minds are invited, but very few ever challenge the room once they're in. Keanu chuckled softly. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Hartwell said with a smile in his voice, you'll fit right in. Over the next few days, the atmosphere around Harvard continued to grow electric. Keanu had started holding informal outdoor sessions on the grass. No classroom, no chalkboard. Just a folding whiteboard, a few markers, and a crowd of curious students sitting in a circle. Some came with deep questions. Some came with fear. Some came just to see him, but every time he welcomed them with the same calm tone. Ask anything, even if it sounds silly. And one afternoon someone did. A boy in a worn hoodie stood up and asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like your mind is a mistake?" The group went silent. Even Maya and Elijah, sitting close to Keanu, stopped moving. Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky for a long time, then said softly, "Yes, many times." He paused. "When I couldn't read fast as a kid, when I forgot lines on set, when someone handed me a puzzle I couldn't solve in front of others." He turned to the boy. "But then I learned something." "What?" The boy whispered. "That your mind isn't a mistake. It's a mystery. And mysteries aren't meant to be shamed. They're meant to be explored." The boy sat down slowly, eyes full of something close to tears. The group clapped. Not out of celebration, but out of understanding. From that day on, more and more students who used to sit in the shadows started showing up. They weren't math majors. Some were artists. Some were athletes. Some had failed math 3 times. But they came anyway, because someone finally made the subject feel safe. A week later, Keanu received a phone call he never expected. It was from a young woman named Dr. Avleen Shah, an Indian-American researcher working on a new cognitive model that used pattern-based emotional mapping to solve equations. She spoke quickly, excitedly. "We've been working on this for years, but we're stuck on the last sequence. And your outdoor lecture. The part where you said logic is emotional, it lit something up. We need your help." Keanu laughed quietly. "I'm not a professional, Dr. Shah." "You're the reason we're still trying," she replied. "You made the world remember that understanding matters more than credentials." He agreed to meet them. When he walked into her research lab 2 days later, surrounded by scattered printouts, screens glowing with complex neural sequences, and the smell of coffee and ambition, he smiled wide. "This," he said, "is beautiful chaos." They worked together for hours, not as scientist and celebrity, but as equals, as thinkers. And by sunset, Keanu pointed to a missing pattern in the upper right corner of the model. "You're using a static arc where it should loop," he said softly. "The emotions behind the variables, they don't rest. They evolve." Dr. Shah stared at the board, eyes filling with tears. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what we missed." Within weeks, their model was presented at a major global summit. It opened new doors in how people with different learning styles could approach mathematics and science without fear or failure. Keanu's name wasn't on the paper, but his voice was in every line. That weekend, Professor Hartwell hosted a private dinner for Keanu and a small group of students and faculty. They gathered in a quiet hall, candles glowing on the long wooden table. Hartwell stood and gave a toast. "Years ago, I believed math was a mountain only few could climb. I forgot it was also a path people could walk together. Thank you, Keanu, for reminding me." Everyone raised their glasses. Keanu stood last. "Thank you," he said, voice humble. "Not for this dinner, but for the seat you gave me in that first classroom. I walked in expecting to watch. I didn't know you'd let me stay." Maya smiled. "You didn't just stay. You started something," Elijah added. "You made math feel like hope." Keanu sat back down, quiet. But inside, something had changed. The part of him that had once whispered, "You're not enough," was now silent. In its place was a new voice, gentle, clear. "You are enough, and so is your curiosity." The final problem and the standing ovation, it was the morning of the symposium in Geneva. The grand auditorium was unlike anything Keanu had ever seen. Polished stone floors, glass walls that looked out over snow-covered mountains, and a ceiling that glowed like the inside of a lantern. Seats filled slowly, row by row, as people from every corner of the world arrived. Mathematicians, educators, students, scientists, philosophers, and journalists. They hadn't come for a celebrity. They came because something had changed, Because one man, without a degree, without a title, had reminded the world that brilliance could wear quiet shoes. Backstage, Keanu stood alone. He wore a simple black suit, no tie. His hands were tucked into his pockets. Behind him stood a large board, already prepared with an untouched equation. The organizers had chosen it carefully, not for its difficulty, but for what it represented, a centuries-old riddle, never solved fully, a symbol of human stubbornness and beauty. As Keanu waited, he thought about everything that led him here, the chalk in his hand during that first lecture, the faces of Maya and Elijah, the boy who thought his mind was broken, Professor Hartwell's handshake, and the notebook with his sister's scribbled numbers, still safely tucked in his suitcase. When the announcer stepped onto the stage and said, "Please welcome our final speaker, Keanu Reeves," the audience burst into applause. But Keanu didn't walk out with a speech. He walked out holding a single piece of chalk. The crowd fell silent as he reached the board. He looked at the massive equation for a long moment, then turned to the audience. "I'm not here to solve this," he said gently. "I'm here to ask why we fear it." People leaned forward. "This problem," he continued, pointing to the symbols, "has scared minds for generations, and maybe that's why it hasn't been solved. Not because it's unsolvable, but because we gave it too much power." He paused. "What if we looked at it like a story instead of a test?" Keanu stepped aside and invited a girl from the front row to join him. She was nervous, but walked up anyway. He gave her the chalk. "Try the first step," he said softly. "But I don't want to mess it up." Keanu smiled. "Good, that means you care." She wrote slowly, shakily, one line. The audience watched, holding their breath. Keanu clapped gently. "That," he said, "is the bravest thing I've seen all day." He handed the chalk to a young man in a wheelchair near the aisle. "Your turn." And then to an older professor with white hair, and a child in the front row visiting with her math teacher. For 20 minutes they built something together. Some steps were wrong. Some led nowhere. But slowly, something started forming. A pattern, a rhythm, a logic shaped not by one mind, but by many. Keanu never took the chalk again. He only guided, and when they reached the end of the board, the audience sat stunned. They hadn't solved the entire equation, but they had solved something else. They had solved the fear. The silence was deep, and then applause. First soft, then rising, until the whole auditorium was on its feet. Keanu looked down, not out of shyness, but humility. He placed the chalk on the tray and whispered to the board, "Thank you." After the event, reporters rushed forward. "What was your strategy? Are you going to teach full-time now? What advice do you have for future mathematicians?" Keanu paused, then said only one thing. "Be curious. Not perfect." Months later, a new class started at Harvard. It was called the Reeves approach, emotional intelligence in logic and learning. It didn't require test scores. Only a letter about why the student wanted to learn. Professor Hartwell taught it. But he always began the class with a short video clip of Keanu saying, "Your mind is a mystery, and that's a beautiful thing." Elijah went on to write a book. Maya became a teacher and started a math club in her old neighborhood. The boy who thought his mind was a mistake? He became a researcher in learning disabilities, helping children who felt the same way he once did. Keanu returned to his normal life. But it wasn't the same. His mailbox filled with thank you letters from students, scientists, and struggling minds across the globe. He never stopped replying. Every now and then he would still walk into a classroom somewhere, sit in the back quietly and learn. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for the joy of it, the peace of it, the meaning of it, and maybe, just maybe, to remind someone that brilliance doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs a chance.